Okay, so continuing on from there, he goes into this hadith from a lesser known collection of Ahmed. It's said to be from Ahmed, where it is said that the apostle of God and his companions went on a trip. When their belongings came too heavy for them to carry, Muhammad told me, "Spread your garment." They filled it with their belongings, then they put it on me. The apostle of God told me, "Carry it, for you are a ship." Even if I was carrying the load of 6 or 7 donkeys while we were on a journey, anyone who felt weak would throw his clothes or his shield or his sword on me, so I would carry that heavy load. The prophet told me, "You are a ship." Now, this hadith seems against the character of the prophet, because I'm going to show you a hadith where the prophet actually said to actually treat slaves better than that and not to overburden them. So this hadith seems in contradiction to how other hadiths explain the character of the prophet and how he explained treatment of slaves. I will show you that now. Okay, so as I was saying, the other hadith seems to contradict the character of the prophet. Here is a hadith in where he speaks of fair treatment of a slave. He says that if you have a slave under your control or brethren under your control, that you should feed them with the same thing that you feed yourself with. You clothe them with the same thing that you clothe yourself with. You should not overburden them with what they cannot bear. And if you do so, you should help them in that job, in that hard job. Now, this seems to be the character of the prophet that I know. The other hadith contradicts his character. That other hadith, speaking of him making this one slave carry 6, 7 times his own weight, and everybody just throwing stuff on him without any regard for him as a human being, seems in total contradiction to the true character of the prophet. This hadith here, now this is the character of the prophet that I know, where he has, regard. He says if they have a hard job, help them. Don't overburden them. The other hadith shows that the slave is being overburdened and nobody cares. Everybody's just throwing a bunch of stuff on him and like, who cares? Who cares? Let him, here's my sword, here's my shield, here, carry my clothes, and like everybody's just treating him like he's inhuman. That is in total contradiction to the true character of the prophet. This hadith shows what the character is more correctly as opposed to the other one. So I don't accept that other hadith that was given. And anyone else should not either, because this shows more in line with the character. The Quran says that the prophet was sent as a mercy to mankind. So this hadith is in line with the Quran, that he is a mercy, not somebody who has a total disregard for others and just letting everybody just pile a bunch of stuff on this one slave without any regard for him as a human being, or whether the burden is too much for him to carry. Alright, from there he goes on and he uses another unreliable narrator like Ibn Ishaq. This time he uses Tabari, which is also known as an unreliable narrator. Tabari himself tells you that his narrations are not, that the authenticity has not been checked. In his own introduction to his own book, here's what Tabari says. Okay, so let's see. Here's what Tabari says in the introduction to his own book. He says, "This book of mine may contain some information mentioned by me on the authority of certain men of the past, which the reader may disapprove of and the listener may find detestable, because he can find nothing sound and no real meaning in it. In such cases, he should know that it is not my fault that such information comes to him, but the fault is upon the one or the someone who transmitted it to me. I have merely reported it as it was reported to me." What does this mean? This means that Tabari just took whatever was said to him. He didn't check to see if it was authentic. He didn't check the text to see, is it something that contradicts Quran? Does it go against the character of the prophet? Does it contradict with Islam? He just took it and reported it. And that's why you will find in Tabari such things that are indeed detestable, that are indeed against the character of Islam and Islamic teachings, because he didn't check the authenticity, he just took it. So as a Muslim, and I suggest other Muslims do the same, do not accept when these people come to you with these less than reliable sources. Do not accept when they come to you and they say, "Oh, Tabari said," you got to let them know these things and these sources are not reliable. The source itself is telling you that it's not reliable. So you got to let them know that and no longer just sit there and accept what they tell you from Tabari. So again, you guys need to start bringing some authentic sources, because I'm not accepting weak sources no more. Okay, now on this one, I tried to see in the video, but I did not see a reference given for this statement at all. Doesn't matter anyway, because it totally contradicts what the Quran says, and it totally contradicts what we know the Prophet for sure said. This, he says, again, he didn't give a reference, but he said, Muhammad said that Arabs were the most noblest and the best indeed, and they were the most prominent. This totally contradicts what the Quran says, and it totally contradicts other verified statements of the Prophet, and I will show you why. Okay, according to the Quran, the noblest in the sight of Allah is not the Arab. The noblest in the sight of Allah are those who are best in conduct, as we see from chapter 49, verse 13. It says, O mankind, we have created you male and female, and have made you nations and tribes, that you may know one another. Lo, the noblest of you in the sight of Allah is the best in conduct. Not the Arab, not the one who speaks Arabic. The best in the sight of Allah from the different tribes and nations are those who are best in conduct regardless of your race. So we know that that statement, he gave no reference for it. We know it's a total fabrication because it totally contradicts what Allah says in the Quran. And I'm going to show you that it contradicts verified statements of the Prophet himself. Now, this is a very famous statement from him from what is known as the farewell sermon. This can be found in most of the hadith collections of Bukhari, Muslim, Ahmed, and various others, and they all record that he clearly said all mankind is from Adam and Eve. And here he says an Arab has no superiority over a non-Arab, nor does a non-Arab have superiority over an Arab. Also, a white has no superiority over black, nor the black has any superiority over a white, except by piety and good action, which is in line with what the Quran says, that the best of you are those who are the best in conduct. Your race has nothing to do with it. So I don't know where you got that reference from. Again, that where he allegedly says that the Arabs are better and noblest and all that, but that is clearly in contradiction to these more verified statements. Further proof why the statement that you gave is further a fabrication is that he couldn't have said that the Arabs are the noblest, because here's what the Quran says. The Quran says that amongst the Arabs, you'll find the worst in disbelief and hypocrisy, and the most likely to ignore the laws that God or Allah has revealed to his messenger. God is omniscient, most wise. So how can they be the most noblest when this is what the Quran actually says? Okay, then from there he mentions this hadith from Sahih Muslim, where all it says is that Aisha decided to buy a slave girl. That's all it says. Doesn't say she's a black slave girl. Doesn't say what kind. Remember earlier I showed you the hadith where Aisha had a slave, an Arab slave. Remember the one what I told you from the tribe of Tamim, and this clearly showed that this was an Arab slave girl. So this hadith has nothing to do with it doesn't say black slave girl or whatever. So I don't know how you're trying to connect this one with anything against racism against blacks. Okay, lastly, they present this hadith, which many of them present and misuse or falsely quote. They present it to us as if the Prophet just made an off-the-hand comment and just said, oh yeah, black people are raising heads, stop, point blank. He didn't say anything else. Why do you guys ignore what the hadith says? The hadith says, listen and obey. Listen and obey your chief, even if an Ethiopian whose head is like a raisin were made your chief. This is against racism. Remember, his audience was mostly Arab, and yet he's telling them, obey your leader, even if he's an Ethiopian, which would be from a different country. If he wanted to say black people, there is a word for black man in Arabic, you know. It's Rajul Aswad, but he said Ethiopian. So this, how are you applying this to all black people? Number one, all black people don't come from Ethiopia. You know that, right? They knew that black people were from different parts of Africa. You know that, right? So how are you guys equating Ethiopian with all black people? We don't all, our ancestry all does not come from Ethiopia. So this argument is totally bogus. Plus, he's saying obey that leader. He's not saying disregard that leader or rebel. He's saying obey the leader, even if he's Ethiopian. You see? And it said that this thing about raisin head, they said what it meant was it's the hair. You know, some Africans, we have you know, tightly little small curls, and it looks like little raisins. So they said this is what this is referring to. It's not derogatory. It's not equivalent to the word nigger that the Christian Europeans placed upon black people. So how you guys present this case like this is just totally bogus. Again, the hadith is clear. If you want to say it's black people, still it's against racism. He's still saying obey the leader. Obey the leader, even if he's an Ethiopian, or if you want to say even if it's a black man. But again, he's very specific. He says Ethiopian. But this could be applied to show that even if a black man becomes the leader, that the Muslims are to obey him. No racism. You obey him no matter what. It's clear. Very clear.